name's Jason, and I love writing music, producing music, and I love the gear that we use to do it. I've started this channel to talk about just these things. Now today we're asking perhaps the age-old question, is analog gear worth it? In particular, we're going to be looking at the Moog sound, and we're going to find out how it stacks up against VST synths that claim to emulate analog sound. You're going to be looking at the Moog Subsequent 25 in comparison with 4 other VST synths. Be interesting to see what we find out. So if you're like me, you want to get the best sound out of your music production. Now, prior to getting into synthesizers, I am and was a guitarist. And in that world, it's all about tone, right? And also, I studied jazz and played in the jazz world, and there very much it's about tone. You want to get good tone, but also tone that is unique to yourself, creating your own sound. Now, the guitar world compared to the synth world, very interesting differences. In the guitar world, we are talking the physical universe. We're talking an actual guitar made of wood, and there's electronics that go into an amplifier and maybe some pedals prior to that chain. But in terms of the actual guitar itself, you need the physical guitar. Now, in the synth world, that is different, obviously. You don't need a physical synth like the one before us. Obviously, you can use VST synths. And there was a time when VST synths were no comparison to the hardware. They just did not sound as good. But nowadays, you can get some pretty darn good sounding VST plugins. So that makes me wonder, do you really need analog hardware in order to get the analog sound? In particular, I'm curious to find out about the Moog sound. We all know Moog has a beautiful sound quality to it. It's a classic sound for a reason. And so I wonder if you need an actual Moog piece of hardware or if you can use a VST synth. It's an important question from a budget standpoint because a Moog synthesizer costs quite a lot of money. The one you see before you, I got used, but brand new, this thing is going for around 1,800 Canadian before taxes. And that's not to mention its bigger brother, the Subsequent 37, which is going for another 1,000 on top of that. Back to that question of, do you need a Moog to get the Moog sound? Do you need to have the analog sound? We're gonna look at comparisons in just a moment, but first, this is a question that you need to answer personally. Back to the guitar comparison. What I was after with my guitar and what everyone's after is your own unique sound, your own unique tone. So you need to ask yourself, what kind of tone do you want to go for? Do you want it to be that classic analog sound or something different? Because the people who are leading the field in music production, they've found their own tone. Deadmau5, for instance, he has his own tone, and it's certainly a classic analog tone. Also Daft Punk, they have their own sound, and it's a classic analog sound. But if you move over into more bass characterized music, like say Skrillex or Kill the Noise, you're looking at a sound that's different. They have their own sound, but it is not an analog sound necessarily. And in fact, the sounds that they're getting for their bass lines, you're not going to be able to achieve it on a classic analog piece of hardware. You're going to need something that's digital with totally different wave tables going on and wave shapes and a lot of different extra complexities going on. Same thing in the drum and bass world. There's people who have found their own sound. I think of Dimension, for instance. He's got this really cool characteristic bass sound, and that isn't made from analog gear. So again, it goes back to what do you want to sound like? And if you want to have an analog sound, that's where we start asking this question: do you need analog hardware? For me personally, I really love an analog quality to my music. I love it for the bass lines, I love it for the melodies and the arpeggios, and I love it for the drums. So I really go for that classic analog sound. So it made sense for me to try to seek the best sound possible, because that's the next thing to think about. When you are crafting your productions, for your lead elements especially, like your bass line, your melodies, your arpeggios, the things that are really going to be featured, you want them to sound how you want them to sound. That might not necessarily mean the highest quality, because you might be going for a lo-fi sound, for instance, but you want it to have the kind of characteristics that you are going for. And again, that comes back to the question of analog. If you want it to have a real classic analog sound, if you want those sounds to have that kind of feature, then you need to ask this question: do I need to look at analog hardware in order to achieve that, or can I get it from VST synths? From a budget standpoint, that is a good question to ask. Now, we are only looking today at sound. We're only looking today at tone. There's lots of videos that are done that talk about the difference between VST, in the box, outside the box, and all the different kind of pluses or minuses that go with each, including hands-on control when you buy hardware. So I'm leaving all those questions out. And again, we are just looking at the sound that each one creates and how the two stack up against each other. We're going to be looking at the Moog exclusively today in terms of hardware. And then from the computer, we're going to be looking at 4 different VSTs that claim to emulate analog hardware. We're going to go to that in just a minute, but before we do, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you're not already. I've just started this channel out just over a month ago, so really appreciate your support. All right, let's go to that now. Okay, so here before us, we have the Subsequent 25 by Moog, and beside it, the Arturia Minilab 3. Now, the Subsequent 25 is our analog hardware feature for today. I wanted to showcase what I think brings the epitome of analog sound, especially that Moog sound that frankly costs a lot of money to get. Now, the Arturia is going to be controlling VSTs on the computer, so we're going to be combining VST plugins and the Moog Subsequent 25. Now, why the 25? Well, this is a combination of what my budget would allow and what I consider to be an incredible sounding analog synth. I find that there's a jump between the Subsequent 37 and 25 that I keep toying with making the investment on, but I actually find the Subs 25 to do all that I need it to do. And I've also looked at the less expensive Moogs like the Minotaur, and in terms of features and physical layout, I much prefer the Sub 25. An equivalent, I think, would be the Grandmother by Moog. That's another one that's in the same price range as a monosynth that has that classic analog Moog sound. Now, what we're going to be looking at in terms of the computer, we're looking at 4 different plugins. And we're starting out with 2 that you might already have and 2 that you would need to pay for in order to get. The first one is Retro Synth by Logic. It's a stock plugin on Logic. It's up right now, and as you can see, it aims to look like a Moog synth. And I've always wondered, how does it stack up against my Sub 25? So today we're giving a comparison. Next, we are looking at Reason. And for Reason, we're looking at the Polytone dual layer synthesizer. This is something that Reason added on to their most current version. And again, it aims to create classic analog sounds. So I thought it would be interesting to compare that with the Moog. Okay, those are the 2 you might already have given your DAW of choice. Beyond that, I would like to look at a UAD product. This is the Polymax by Universal Audio. Universal Audio is known for making really good emulations of classic analog hardware, and so this is one of their synth attempts at this. So I thought great opportunity to compare that with the Moog. Now, lastly, what we're looking at is the Native Instruments Monark. This one I just picked up recently. It was actually on a sale, so it wasn't that expensive. And this is Native Instruments attempt to capture a classic Moog sound. So they're going after one of the most classic pieces of Moog hardware, the Mini Moog. And you can see the layout here is designed to capture that in terms of the controls. So while this isn't trying to emulate the Sub 25, obviously, it's still giving us the Moog sound. And so I thought it'd be interesting to compare that with this, especially since Native Instruments have said they've taken really a lot of care in trying to capture the hardware and all the nuances of the hardware. So those are the four we're going to be comparing, and we're going to keep it simple. I'm going to start out with just the basic sawtooth wave for each, and then we're going to add a filter cutoff sweep. Beyond that, we're looking at resonance on the filter, and then from there, we are combining oscillators, and lastly, checking out the drive options. Okay, let's dive in. All right, so let's start out with the retro here, and we're going to be comparing it against the Subsequent 25. We're starting out with just a sawtooth shape, one oscillator, filter wide open. Here's the way the Moog sounds. Here's the way the retro sounds. Moog, retro. Now, this is something that's going to carry us through the other plugins. You'll notice that the retro and the plugin has a brighter sound to it, much brighter than the Subsequent 25. And you can see it on the multimeter, and you can see how there's a different curve going on as well. Right around that 16K, there's a drastic difference between the two. So you're getting a brighter sound with the plugin and a darker sound with the Moog. That is a matter of taste, I think, and we can always roll off the filter a little bit on the plugins in order to kind of capture the sound. But I'm interested to hear what you think. Which one has the sweeter sound to it? To my ears, there's a little more oomph and presence to the Moog than to the retro. But to me, it's quite a similar sound going on here. Now, let's make things more interesting. Let's start adding filter. We're going to do rolling the filter on the Moog. Now the retro. The Moog. Retro. Okay, so I'd love to hear your thoughts here. They sound pretty similar. We are really talking about small details. To me, the Subsequent 25, there's more presence. There's more of a bit of a grit going on behind the filter. It's a warmer sound, but only by a tiny amount. The retro sounds pretty darn good. That LP 24 dB Lush, again, you can choose other filters to compare it to as well. Now, let's start adding resonance. I'm putting the Moog to 6, and I'm putting the retro to 0.6. So let me sweep the filter now with resonance. Okay, now the retro. The Moog. The retro. Okay, to my ears, quite similar sounding. There's something maybe a little more musical about the Moog, but pretty similar. Now, okay, we're going to take off the resonance. We're going to open up the filters, and we're going to add another oscillator to each with a little bit of offset in the frequency. Okay, so here's the Moog, 2 sawtooths. Here's the retro. The Moog. Retro. Now there is quite a difference. Now, it's similar but different, right? And I think we're now getting into tonality differences and matters of taste. One is going to bring you much brighter sound, but the two oscillators are working well together. On this is on the retro. On the Moog, it's a darker sound, and the oscillators are really working together nicely. So, pretty cool, pretty interesting comparison so far. Now we are going to up the resonance and sweep the filter on both now that we have two oscillators. Here's the Moog. And here is the retro. The Moog. The retro. To me, the Moog wins that one. There's something about it. It's more musical, there's more presence. It's almost like the retro starts to break up a little. You're adding all these different elements that are moving together, and it's almost as if it doesn't quite know how to handle it. But the Moog, they are working together beautifully, I think. And maybe that's part of the magic of hardware. As you start to add the different components, they work together in a way that maybe sometimes is harder for computers to capture. But I'm not sure. Let's keep moving on. Now, the last thing to notice about the Moog, we have different drive options when it comes to the sound. We've got a pre-filter drive and a post-filter drive. In the mixer, you can go past 5, and that starts to introduce drive, and it really does change the sound. So it starts to compensate for that darkness. It adds a brighter sound to it. It adds more beef to it. And so really giving it a new shape to it. And then also the multi-drive. Really gives us a ton of saturation. Again, really brightening up, really thickening it up. Those can work interestingly with the filter. Here's with a lot of drive. So totally different sound. And on the retro, you're not going to get that. You're not seeing these drive features on the retro. Okay, so let's look at the next plugin. We're looking at the Polytone synthesizer. This is in Reason, and it's an interesting one because in the new version of Reason, they've created this synthesizer that they want for us to make classic analog tones very simply, very quickly. So I thought it'd be an interesting comparison. So let's hear the Moog again. Cut off, wide open, and a sawtooth. And now here's the Polytone. Okay, so a much, much brighter sound to it. The curve is quite different in the multimeter. Otherwise, similar shape in the oscillator, or sorry, in the oscilloscope. Now let's move on. I'm going to sweep the filter on both. Here's the Moog. Here's the Polytone. On the Moog. On the Polytone. Okay, the filters sound quite similar to my ears. Both sound really good. I'd like to know what you think. Let's try resonance up 6 on the Moog. Now on the Polytone. On the Moog. On the Polytone. What I'm hearing is a bit of a drive going on in the Polytone, which is not happening in the Subsequent 25. So what I'm going to do is lower the level in the mixer, because I believe that's driving the filter, and let's compare. Here's the Moog again. Here's the Polytone. Yeah, there we go. That sounds a lot more similar. We're going to up the resonance to try to create more of a Moog style. Still not really getting it. Let's up it even more. Okay, that sounded pretty similar now. Again. That's interesting. Now, when we lower that mixer volume, the resonance filter to my ears sounds quite similar. That's an important point because, as we know on the Moog, it's known for its ladder filter. It's something that is very desirable about this unit. And Reason, to my ears, is capturing it pretty well. Love to know what you think. Okay, let's now move to dual oscillators, two sawtooth oscillators. We're going to put that in on both. So here it is on the Moog. That great sound of the two of them going up against one another. And now let's hear it on the Polytone. Interesting, right? They both sound really good. Let's try the Moog again. Polytone. So they both sound really good, both bringing out characteristics. I feel like the Polytone is bringing out the characteristics of the hardware. It's just such a different sound with the brightness in the Polytone versus the Subsequent 25. Okay, let's bring up the resonance and see what it sounds like to sweep with these two. Now in the Polytone. Pretty similar. I don't know what you're thinking. I'm finding these quite similar. To my ears, the Moog has a little bit more presence going on, and the resonance with the cutoff filter and these two oscillators, it's just a little more musical to my ears. There's something about it that just sounds a little more tasteful, if that makes sense. But I don't know. It's very similar here. Now, let's just look at drive for a second. As you know, on the Subsequent 25, we can drive into the mixer, and that sounds like this. Lower the resonance. Increasing the volume and the brightness quite considerably. Now let's try that on the Polytone. Very similar sound. You saw how the shape in the oscilloscope was a little bit different for each, but a similar warm, meaty sound going on between the two. Okay, let's move on. Now we are moving over to the Universal Audio Polymax. This is one that you're going to have to pay for, right? We're moving into that territory. Now, Universal Audio, well known for its emulations of analog gear, and so I thought it'd be interesting to try out the Polymax against a piece of analog gear, the Subsequent 25. So let's start out again, the Subsequent 25 with just the sawtooth. Okay, here's the Subsequent. Here's the Universal Audio Subsequent Polymax. So again, a similar sound going on, but much brighter in the Polymax. Again, this is a theme that's developing. Now let's add some resonance to see how that sounds. Here's the Moog. Now let's try out the Polymax. The Moog. The Polymax. Now with the resonance, they do sound similar to me. It's capturing that musical quality of the Moog hardware, and I like it. Okay, let's now add in a second oscillator to see how those sound. Here's the Moog. Here's the universal audio, faster. So they're interacting really nicely together. I think what's throwing me is the brightness difference between the two. I'm still not sure which one I like more. To me, there's something about the possibility of that more darkness to the Subsequent 25. But again, that could be something that you just compensate for with the filter. So let's just try that actually. That's about the same. Pretty similar stuff there. Okay, now we're going to add the resonance and we're going to sweep the filter with these two oscillators. Sounds nice. Okay, that didn't sound anywhere near as good to my ears. Let's add a little more resonance. Trying to be smooth. It's a bit harder to turn that encoder than it is the actual filter on the Subsequent. Let's try that again, comparing. Just sounds really nice. Let's try the Polymax. Just doesn't sound anywhere near as smooth and it doesn't sound as musical. So I would say that one kind of fails in the resonance with the two oscillators. That's something that I think I'm noticing. I mentioned it before, but I like how things interact together on hardware. It's very musical, it's very tasteful, but sometimes in the plug-in form, things starts to break down. They start to break down a little bit when you're adding more and more complexity. Okay, last thing to check between these two is the drive options. We've already seen what the Moog can do. Let's hear the Polymax if we drive the oscillator into the filter. Here's the Moog. Here's the Polymax. Moog. Polymax. So there's a similar drive characteristic going on between the two here. So that's interesting. Let's just sweep the filter. Cool. Let me just see both of these together. The Moog. Sounds great. Now the Polymax. Moog. Polymax. Does sound a little better now, driving the filter a bit. That seemed to create more warmth and more presence. Okay, that's the Polymax. Let's keep moving on. Okay, now we are on to the Native Instruments Monark, and this one, as you can see, is meant to emulate a classic mini Moog. So I thought it'd be really interesting to stack this one up against the Subsequent 25. To change things up, we've been taking more of a scientific approach. Now we're going to take a more musical approach, and I am going to be showing arpeggios done with each of these, and we're going to be dialing in the same sorts of features, filter sweeps, resonance, and drive, that sort of thing. So let's move to that. So we've compared the two now with arpeggios, and I gotta say, I'm not sure which one I like better. I'm really interested to hear what you think. I'm kind of holding back a verdict here. We've been looking at the Moog Subsequent 25 and now the Monark in an arpeggio, and I'm hearing differences in style. I'm hearing different nuances to the Monark than I am with the Subsequent 25. It's really got me thinking that the plug-in form sounds really cool alongside the Subsequent 25. So you be the judge. Okay, well, I hope you found that fun and interesting and inspiring. I know that I did. This was a chance to finally get around to comparing VSTs to my Moog hardware. And what I found in the end is that I'm really happy with my Subsequent 25. That's to my ears anyways. There's something about the Subsequent 25 that when you start adding the parts up together, it creates what I'm looking for. It creates a classic analog sound that's interesting, that's complex. And also on top of that, I love the drive features that it has. So I'm happy with my purchase, but you might have a different sound in mind. You might appreciate the brightness of the VSTs, for instance. So you have to ask that question. Do I prefer, say, Monark to what this analog hardware sounded like? If so, just go for the Monark. That is on sale right now at Plug-in Boutique for quite a reduced rate. We're talking about like $1,000 or almost $2,000 difference here. So it's a big question. Okay, I'm gonna leave off there for today. If you like this video, I'd love your support. Please like and subscribe and even share it with others. I am trying to create a channel. I'm creating a channel here that's meant to be a positive voice, that's offering some unique looks at hardware and music production. So if you like it, please feel free to like and subscribe. Until next time then, take care. Bye.